The learning objective of this chapter is to become familiar with the phenomenon of parametric rolling, the effects of parametric rolling on container ships, and stability variations associated with parametric rolling. Parametric rolling, or autoparametric, is not a new phenomenon. It has been known for many years and has been of great concern to the shipping industry due to several casualties that involved fishing vessels and small ships sailing in following sea conditions with low residual stability. Due to the many casualties involving the effects of following seas on small ships, early concerns therefore focused only on following seas and low residual stability. Extensive experiments and simple calculations were carried out, most of which illustrated clearly the effects of waves on the transverse stability of small vessels. Small righting levers were an obvious cause of vessel losses, but there were apparently no links between marginal stability and head seas. It was generally considered that following seas were ultimately responsible for the loss of these vessels, and that head seas were unimportant and did not account for losses. Today, parametric rolling is usually associated with large container ships. Basically, it is a dynamic, unstable phenomenon that affects ships with flared bows and wide, flat sterns. A ship is said to be rolling in its resonant mode when it encounters one wave cycle during one roll cycle. For example, when a ship is upright in a wave trough, the next wave crest approaching from the starboard beam will lift the ship, causing it to roll to port and then to starboard as the wave crest passes under it. In near-head seas, parametric rolling can occur due to the combination of certain unfavorable factors. The most important of these factors are low roll damping, caused by low speed below a certain limit for a particular ship form, and substantial variations in ship stability resulting from wave height, wavelength, the general hull form, bow flare, and a wide flat stern. Bow flare is important because of the amount of righting energy introduced in this part of a ship when a wave crest has just passed under the amidships area. It is significant because at this instant a ship experiencing parametric rolling is returning from its maximum roll angle and is also pitched down by the head. In an ultra-large container ship, bow flare could produce an adverse effect during heavy weather. The natural frequency of the ship's hull girder can be such that the impact of slamming due to bow flare will heighten vibrations throughout the ship's structure. A ship's speed is directly related to roll damping and should be borne in mind when a ship encounters head seas in heavy weather. Head seas automatically reduce a ship's speed. If engine revolutions are also reduced so as to keep within the limits of the load diagram, the reduced speed could result in large roll motions that would quickly reach large amplitudes, resulting in heavy weather damage to ship and/or containers. Depending upon the geometry of a particular ship, the lower the ship's speed, the larger the frequency of occurrence of parametric roll motions. This phenomenon, however, can only be realized by the repeated experiences of a master aboard the same vessel. It is best to maintain sea speed and steer a course, preferably with the seas approaching from close to the beam, so that roll and pitch motions do not synchronize. Generally, with a sufficiently high speed, no large roll motions will occur. This is an extreme case of heavy weather damage, in which the ship's motions, combined with the forces of the sea, resulted in twist lock and lashing rod failures and a heavy loss of containers overboard. In late October 1998, a laden post-Panamax C-11 class container ship eastbound across the Pacific Ocean was overtaken by a typhoon. The typhoon encounter lasted for about 12 hours, mostly during the hours of darkness, during which the master reduced speed and attempted to steer the ship into increasingly higher seas off the ship's starboard bow. The ship experienced severe short-crested seas from forward of the beam to head seas. According to her officers and crew, the ship also experienced extreme angles of roll. Ultimately, the seas became completely confused and violent. officers reported green water at bridge level during the worst of the typhoon and observed that container stacks immediately forward of the bridge had collapsed. Containers in the after bay were also believed to have collapsed when a container's corner casting punctured the main deck above the steering gear compartment, allowing ingress of seawater into that compartment. The master later described the ship as absolutely out of control during the worst of the typhoon, and testified that he had tried to maintain the ship's head into the prevailing seas as best he could determine, since the seas were completely confused. Deck and engineer officers reported unexpected, extreme and violent ship motions during the worst typhoon conditions. The ship apparently yawed to angles of up to 20 degrees, port and starboard, which made it impossible for the ship to maintain her course, besides adding to the danger of losing containers overboard. Overspeed trips on the main engine, together with propeller shaft vibrations and pounding, reflected significant pitch amplitudes. Port and starboard rolls of up to 35 to 40 degrees were reported, simultaneously with the extreme pitching. As we have seen earlier in this module, transverse accelerations are caused mainly by rolling and, to a lesser extent, a combination of yawing and swaying. Since this vessel lost around 400 containers overboard, it would be reasonable to assume that transverse acceleration forces exceeded the ultimate strength design of the container lashing components. The following morning it was found that of the 1,300 containers on deck, almost one-third had been lost overboard, and another one-third had been variously damaged. Containers and cargoes hung over both sides of the ship. The impact of wave damage was observed when the ship arrived at her destination, where it was found that the forward container stacks had been damaged from bow seas and along the entire starboard side of the ship from seas breaking over its decks. Surveys indicated that boarding seas had reached as high as the foremast and the ship's navigation lights on the bridge. Due to the heavy weather that this vessel experienced and the resulting damage to ship, containers and cargo, the ship owner, consignees, container operators and their respective underwriters were faced with the largest container casualty in history. C-11 class ships are second-generation post-Panamax container ships and have typical dimensions of 262 meters length, 40 meters breadth and 24.45 meters depth, on a maximum summer draft of 14 meters. At the time of the incident, the ship's mean draft was 12.34 meters, with a corresponding freeboard of slightly more than 12 meters. Prior to the casualty, the ship's GM was approximately 2 meters, giving her a natural roll period of 25.7 seconds. With respect to the case study, the master attempted to heave to, or head the ships into the waves at reduced speed during the period of encounter with the typhoon. Based on studies that were completed after the incident, the wave height during the period ranged somewhere between 11 and 15 meters, and the peak wave period ranged somewhere between 13 and 16 seconds. The ship's natural roll period was estimated at 25.7 seconds, and for this particular ship type, the ratio between wave encounter, wave height, speed and roll period gave rise to conditions that favored the occurrence of parametric rolling during the storm. The extreme angles of roll reported by the ship's officers might well have been outside the normal classification society limits, usually between 22 and 30 degrees. One of the lessons you will learn from this case study will be to heed the advice given to every newcomer on board a particular ship, which is to know your ship. This ship was designed with a flat transom and large bow flare, which made her vulnerable to the effects of swell approaching from right ahead to approximately 35 degrees on each bow. The ship encountered heavy weather during sea passage across the North Atlantic in late January, when the worst weather conditions can be expected in that region. As weather conditions deteriorated, the ship encountered wind speeds close to 70 knots, and swell estimated at 6 meters. The master, fully aware of the effects of parametric rolling, altered course and adjusted speed to reduce rolling and slamming. Later that day, he headed the ship directly into the swell at reduced speed. In order to stop any increase in pitching, the ship's speed over the ground was reduced to around 4.8 knots, and although the ship was headed almost into the swell, larger and longer waves approached from the bows. The vessel's roll was increasing, although there was no increase in the height of swell. Wavelengths were almost equal to the ship's length. During this period, it is possible that the ship's bows and stern rested on successive wave crests, with the amidships area in the wave trough. In this condition, due to bow flare and wide flat transom, the waterplane area would have increased as compared to a level waterline. The increased waterplane area would have resulted in a higher GM. There would also have been rapid changes in stability as each wave crest passed under the ship, with associated oscillating GM values. During the afternoon watch, the master decided to head the ship due south, directly into the swell in an attempt to reduce the possible onset of parametric rolling. By the end of the watch, the vessel was still pitching heavily, but the master intended for the ship to meet the swell. Early during the evening watch, the fluid GM was increased to around 1.13 meters, shortly after which the ship took a number of large consecutive rolls, reportedly up to 30 degrees. Whilst returning to the upright position from one particular roll, a steep-sided wave struck the ship on the port side of Bay 14, creating increased accelerations during the rest of that roll period until the ship returned upright. The wave effect also swung the ship's head rapidly to starboard. Once upright, several containers collapsed at Bay 34, located directly in front of the bridge. Some 26 containers were subsequently lost overboard. Around 27 collapsed, and only 9 containers remained secured in their respective stowage positions. Lashings on the affected containers at Bay 34 were completely destroyed. Semi-automatic twist locks had broken, and the lashing rods had parted. Containers had compressed, with several container corner castings ripped open. The collapse of the container stacks at Bay 34 was probably due to a significant increase in downward compression during heaving and racking forces exerted on the bottom containers by acceleration forces imposed on the deck cargo due to the ship's motions. Also, at the bottom of Bay 14, compression forces had damaged 4 containers, but all lashing components were intact. The resulting investigation revealed that the ship had sailed in violation of the requirements of the cargo loading manual, as the distribution of weights at Bay 34 was found not to be compliant. Apparently, the excessive heavy rolling also resulted in failure of the lowest refrigerated container, located at Bay 34, row 07. This resulted in a domino effect, by which it was considered that progressive collapsing of containers occurred. Let us now consider a scenario in which a container ship with a wide flat stern and pronounced flared bows starts fulfilling the following criteria. A. The ship is meeting head seas or nearly head seas, or is running with the seas from astern or fine on the quarter, together with B. Rolling naturally with a roll period estimated at, say, 18.5 seconds, together with C. The ship meeting successive peak waves at regular intervals ranging between, say, 9.5 and 11 seconds. The officer of the watch should be alert to the fact that his ship is heading into danger and that parametric rolling is very likely to occur. The purpose of choosing imaginary figures for the ship's natural roll period and period of wave encounter is purely to highlight that a watchkeeping officer should be alerted to the fact that his ship's natural roll period is close to twice that of the period of wave encounter, and that his ship is rolling in the absence of beam seas. A transversely symmetrical ship moving in pure head or following long-crested seas will pitch, heave and surge, but will not experience transverse rolling. However, under certain conditions of wave encounter, rolling can be induced. Keeping this in mind, a watchkeeping officer should not assume that all is well if his ship is meeting head-on seas only, or is running before the seas. In the scenario, with his ship pitching and to some extent perhaps rolling slightly, he should remember that with the ship on automatic steering, or even in the hand steering mode, the rudder will work continuously to keep the ship on track. That, as we shall see now, should be a cause for concern. The ship could start rolling at any stage if a movement, such as caused by a large rudder angle, was applied, causing the ship to take a small roll to one side. In a hull form comprising a wide flat stern and flared bow, the small roll angle could unexpectedly increase from just a few degrees to over 25 degrees in only a few roll cycles. This could lead to parametric rolling if the ship were to start fulfilling conditions favoring it. Once parametric rolling is initiated, the ship will continue to roll and will start pitching violently with possibly 2 pitch cycles for each roll cycle. During this time, the ship will always be pitched down by the bow at maximum roll to one side, and when upright at 0 heel, it will be pitched by the stern. When at maximum roll to the other side, the ship will be pitched down by the bow again. With the ship now experiencing the 6 degrees of motion, the associated acceleration forces will be transmitted to the container securing system. Again, as discussed earlier in this module, roll amplitudes may exceed the typical classification society limits of between 22 and 30 degrees. In practice, even with a ship rolling between these roll amplitudes, some items of container lashing gear could fail sooner than others. Where twist locks fail on outboard on-deck stows, the corresponding containers will be lost overboard. Failure on older, poorly maintained or worn twist locks will occur sooner than on newer or well-maintained items. In general, for hull forms comprising flared bows and flat wide sterns, stability variations associated with parametric rolling are fairly obvious in situations where the waves have a length almost equal to the ship's length. The stability varies. When a wave trough is near the amidships area, the GM and length of righting levers will increase. With a wave crest amidships, the reverse happens, with a corresponding reduction in stability. When the flared bow section and the flat wide stern section of a large container ship are both submerged in 2 successive wave crests with a corresponding wave trough amidships, the ship's waterplane is generally wider than it was when the ship was at rest in still water. At this instant, the GM and righting moments increase as compared to the ship lying in calm waters. The increase in righting moments is generally due to the waterline coming up to the flared bows and the wide flat stern. With a wave crest amidships and the corresponding troughs under the bows and stern, the waterline width amidships will remain unchanged due to the ship's parallel body. However, due to the significantly reduced waterline width at the bows and stern and corresponding smaller waterplane areas, the GM and righting moments will decrease. It should be appreciated that when waves whose lengths are roughly equal to the length of a ship pass under the ship, the righting arm levers will constantly change in relation to the ship's changing waterplane areas. There will therefore be variations in the ship's stability that may lead to parametric rolling, in which the restoring moments, or righting levers, will not only be a function of the angle of heel, but will also be a function that varies with the passage of time, the period of wave encounter. Parametric rolling can occur if a ship starts to encounter sufficient wave energy at regular intervals close to twice the ship's natural roll period. The illustration shown here is an operational polar diagram for long crested seas and shows how long roll motions can occur over a wide range of speeds and headings for a given seaway/loading condition. This type of diagram can be useful in helping to avoid parametric rolling while a ship is operating in severe sea conditions. It can also further the level of understanding of susceptibility to this phenomenon for a given hull form.